Hello, and welcome to another edition of Bible Time. And today we're starting the book of Judges. The book of Judges, very interesting book, and probably the least known of the historical books in the Old Testament. You may have heard of Gideon, you may have heard of Samson, but that's maybe as far as it goes in terms of your familiarity with this book. And so I'm looking forward to going through it and the things that we're going to learn. Now, it's not a happy book. There's even the judges that are going to be raised up. Some of them are pretty sketchy. But what you'll see is the first couple of chapters explain the disobedience of the people. Chapters 3 through 16 talk about the deliverance through the judges. And then chapter 17 through 21 describe disaster, total disaster amongst the people. This covers a period of around 300 years. We believe the author is Samuel. And one of the keys to the book, you're going to eventually run into the phrase, there was no king in Israel. Well, Samuel's setting that up for the fact that there's going to be a king in Israel, and eventually that's going to be David, the one that Samuel anoints to be king of Israel. So that's where this book is pointing to. It's pointing to the need for a king. David's going to be that king. And kind of a key that goes along with there is no king is that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Well, that sounds an awful lot like modern America. So this will be a totally relevant kind of a book for us. And the main thing in here is not the judges. They're not like the stars of the story. The star of the story is God and what God is doing. It's going to demonstrate God's grace, God's jealousy for his own name, and he doesn't put up with competitors, with idols, and it's going to talk about the faithfulness of God. And what we're going to see, especially here at the beginning, is the consequences of the compromise of the people. God said, drive all of the nations out. They didn't do that, and they suffered consequences as a result. For example, in chapter 1, verse 27, and this is just one, this is kind of like the story of every tribe. It says, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bet-Shan and its villages. And it goes on to say, the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. So they didn't drive them out, they let them stay there. But then it goes on in verse 28 to say, when Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them out completely. So there's the compromise. They didn't drive them out. And then eventually, it looks like maybe this is a good thing because they stuck around, we put them to work. There's a pragmatic success, but it's a spiritual failure. And that's what happens to you and me when we don't deal with the sin in our own life, when we don't drive it out, and we start to rationalize it, and we start to think that actually maybe this is to my advantage somehow. Well, here's what happened. Here's the consequences. Listen to what happened. Chapter 2, verse 1. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land, and I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this that you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be snares to you. As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim. Yeah, because they botched it. And they sacrificed there to the Lord. Now, Bochim really means weepers. And it's probably really Bokim is how to pronounce it. But anyways, there's the consequences for them. Down in verse 14, we see more of the consequences because they're not faithful to God. God's going to turn them over. It says, so the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. That's what's going to happen. And you're going to see that repeated time and time after time. And God's going to raise up a judge, but then they're going to go back to doing what they did before, even more so. And so it's not a cycle of sin, judge, and then some time of rest, and then it's just a matter of time before they go back to it again. No, it's a downward spiral because it gets worse. It keeps getting worse every time. Here's the root problem. Here's something for you and me as parents, grandparents, people in a church that have children, so that's like all of us now. Here's the thing, verse 10, chapter 2. It says, all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for them. See, the generation of Joshua and those leaders, Caleb, they all died off. Then another generation rose up that didn't know God or his works. It wasn't like they didn't know about him. It wasn't like they hadn't heard about what he had done, but they did not know him. They knew about him. They didn't know him. That's a real danger, raising children that they just come to know about him. They don't really ever come to know him. And notice, it only takes one generation for things to fall apart. So there's a lot for us to think about here, dealing with this sin in our own life, not making compromises, and being faithful to bring the next generation to the knowledge of him. That's the beginning. That's the start of the book of Judges. So buckle up your chin strap, get ready, because this is going to be a rough ride, but it's really going to be helpful and insightful for you and me in our own spiritual lives.